Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Namaskar. You have stepped into a course that is going to change the way that you look at data. Not just how you analyze it, but also how you communicate it. My name is Nivid Desai. I serve as the Program Executive at Writing Studio IIT Gandhinagar. Welcome to Writing for Data Science. This course is at the intersection of analysis and communication. As all of us know, data analysis is not just about coding and models. It is about solving real-world problems. And that is exactly why every single thought that goes into solving those problems needs to be communicated. And not just to one audience, across multiple stakeholders. That is where this course comes in. This course prepares you with the foundations of writing, especially curated for data science. We will discuss audience analysis, critical thinking, logical reasoning, as well as storytelling that is native to data science. So join me on a journey at the intersection of numbers and narratives. I'll see you in class. Namaste, hello and welcome to Writing for Data Science. My name is Nivid Desai and we are on a journey to explore the interesting intersections between numbers and narratives. In today's lecture, I want to talk about an important component of our entire writing process. This component is not only a part of our daily writing process, but also an integral part of the academic and technical writing processes. So we are going to learn something universal that pervades all different kinds of writing practices and helps us achieve an excellence within our writing. Today's lecture is about peer review and collaborative critique in data writing. This practice is rooted in the principle of feedback. And I understand that most of us think of writing as a lonely pursuit, but feedback is very much ingrained within the part of the writing and thinking process. Why is it? Why is feedback the part of the thinking process? In data science writing, we often think that the hardest part is finishing a report or analysis. But the real growth happens when others read your work, ask questions, challenge assumptions, and suggest improvements. That process is called peer review and collaborative critique. Critique here does not only mean criticizing, as in negative feedback. Critique just means responding to any content that is presented in front of you. And the response should be balanced, should be thought-provoking and constructive. These are not just about fixing typos or formatting. Those can be done by software, as we all know. They are tools for refining your reasoning. They are also tools for strengthening your argument and seeing your blind spots. All of us look at our own reasoning from our own perspective. And it is natural, it is valid that we may have some blind spots ourselves. And those may not be obvious, or those may also not be present in our consideration. However, when somebody else reads our work and considers the kind of assumptions that we are making, it is highly likely that the flaws, the gaps, and the pitfalls in logic will be very obvious to them because they may not be their blind spots. Seeking feedback from them will help us see these things clearly and accommodate that feedback and revision to ensure that our logic is thorough and without any pitfalls. This is why feedback is part of the thinking process. It strengthens the kind of perspective that you eventually bring onto the table. Here's a reflection spot before we move forward. Have you ever received a comment or a question that made you rethink how you explained something? Has anybody responded or probed you in a certain direction that made you reconsider the language that you used, the level at which you were talking? What changed after that? What kind of improvements did you make? Remembering that memory will help you understand why feedback is central to how we evolve as writers, thinkers, and communicators. Before we move forward, I want to give further clarification on these two terms that we are going to discuss today: peer review and collaborative critique. Peer review and collaborative critique are both new terms for us, I understand that. And in today's lecture, we are going to keep referring to them repeatedly. So I think it is important that we gain some background into what they are and how they work. So let's begin with peer review. What is peer review? Peer review is when someone with similar knowledge or training evaluates your work to give constructive feedback before it is finalized. Some keywords over here: someone with similar knowledge or training. The word peer in technical and academic writing has a special meaning. It means somebody who knows what you are talking about, somebody who understands the vocabulary, the depth of knowledge, and the field expertise that you are bringing to the table. They may be at the similar, same, or even more advanced level of knowledge proficiency within the field that you are practicing. That person is your peer. It is a technical term, it is a jargon. That is why it is important that we understand what these words mean. Somebody who has similar knowledge or training, meaning they will know the jargon, they will know the technical terms, they will know the methodology, and therefore they will be qualified and equipped to give you constructive feedback, not just pointing out flaws or not just pointing out mistakes, but giving you constructive feedback on how to build this thinking direction better. And they are roped in before your draft is finalized, before your entire argument is in its full form. So how does it work for us? In data writing, this could include checking if your conclusions follow from your evidence, spotting unclear phrasing or unexplained methods, suggesting better visualizations or examples, challenging assumptions, biases, or logical gaps. If you consider, these things are more likely to be missed by us whenever we are preparing a first draft. Because as we discussed, all of us run the risk of looking at our first draft from a limited scope of perspective. Yes, it is a worthy pursuit to start widening your perspective, but it is also too much to expect from our own selves to have a really expansive perspective in the first draft itself. That expansive perspective may not come naturally. It may take years to build that perspective. That is why we ask our peers to review and critique our work. For example, you write something like, "The model performs well across all user groups," but a peer points out Did you test that across gender, age, and regions separately? This happens because the peer does not have the same blind spots. They do not have the same assumptions that we do. And also because they understand the technical definition of evaluating model performance really well. This is why they can point out a logical nuance that we might have missed in our analysis. If we consider their feedback, our claim becomes stronger, it becomes clearer, and it becomes much more valid to defend. This is why peer review is a central part of both thinking and writing. Now that we've understood what peer review is, let us move on to the other 50% of today's lecture, collaborative critique. What is collaborative critique? Collaborative critique goes beyond a one-time review, meaning I give you the document, you give me remarks, and I receive it back from you, transaction done. That is not what collaborative critique is. It goes beyond that. It goes beyond just a simple glance and a few remarks of improvement. It means working together to improve a piece of writing by discussing ideas out loud, asking each other questions, offering alternative explanations or structures, and revisiting all of these ideas, revising them iteratively, not just only once. These are the practices of collaborative critique. If you see these things like discussing ideas out loud, making a conversation out of it, you will understand that writing is not only putting words down on paper. This practice helps us cement the perspective that we have started to build from day one in this class. That writing is not just a product, it is a process. For example, two teammates debate the introduction of a dashboard report. One says, let's lead with the results because they are our champions. They prove what we are trying to say. While the other says, let's explain why this matters to the business first. Both arguments have merit. Both arguments have their own reasoning for being right. So, in the end, they settle on a new structure that blends both the results as well as the relevance of the business. What they would do is they would not only present data, they would contextualize the data with reference to the importance and impact on the business. That is the result of collaborative critique. Now that we have understood what peer review is and what collaborative critique is, let's see why they matter in our work. In data work, writing is not just about showing what you did. We have discussed this in the past lectures as well. Reporting data is not data writing. It is about convincing, it is about clarifying and taking responsibility. Good peer review helps you make your writing more understandable. It avoids overconfidence or vague language. It helps you catch gaps in reasoning or unsupported claims. And it helps you write for your audience, not just for yourself. All the practices that we have learned so far only get enhanced with the help of good peer review and collaborative critique. For example, before publication, most scientific studies also go through multiple layers of peer review. And this is not just for grammar, it is also for validity, methods, and ethics. The same care should apply to data-driven writing used for decisions as well. You might have heard about peer-reviewed journals in science. In that name, the peer review is exactly talking about what we just discussed. Let's assume that somebody from across the world has proposed a new scientific principle or a new scientific experiment. How are we to trust that person? How are we to see if they are doing exactly what needs to be done or whether they are correct or right at the end of it? We don't have a measure of testing except for peer review. So their paper goes to a peer who understands the same field, who has the same types of expertise, and can see it from a new perspective. That peer review helps us gauge whether the person in the beginning has made the right decisions and assumptions or not. After having gone through peer review once or twice or multiple layers, the paper is revised, the paper is edited, and then it is published. This is why they become robust scientific documents. Think about the kind of clarity that will reflect in that document because it has gone through these many layers of peer review. And now, imagine what your data writing could do after having gone through this much scrutiny. Here's an exercise for you. You wrote, "Our churn model is effective." What are the 3 things that a peer should check or ask you when they are trying to critique your work? Think about it from a writer's point of view first, and then from a critique's point of view later. Think about why these questions would matter. I will come back to you with a step-by-step explanation of how the peer review process actually works. Now that we have understood the importance of peer review and collaborative critique in data science writing, let us actually get into the details. How does the peer review process work? If you want to make peer review an integral part of your writing process, what should you do? Step 1. You share a draft. Make sure that it is readable with clear sections. This draft, this first draft, does not need to be perfect. The point of the first draft is to get it done, not get it right. Step 2. You set expectations. You ask your reviewer what you want help with. Do you want help with logic, with tone, with structure, or with clarity for non-technical readers? Any of these fields can be evaluated by your reviewer. I would also recommend that you give them enough freedom to point out things which may not be obvious to you. You, as the writer, may have felt that the logic is where your challenge is, or the tone is where your challenge is. But ask them, do they see some pitfalls? Do they see some holes in your arguments that you were not aware of? Keep that door open for more feedback to come in, more than what you had asked for. So, of course, all of these areas are there: logic, tones, structure, clarity for non-technical readers. But there may be more than what you asked for as well. Keep your eyes and ears open, and you might find more ways of making your document come alive. Then, you give and receive comments in step 3. Focus on the specifics, not general praise or criticism. Don't just say, "good job," or "needs improvement." When you give or receive critique, be as specific as you can. Criticism or feedback is not only for positive and negative indicators, they are constructive. These questions can be considered as constructive criticism. See, for example, what did you mean here? This is a clarifying question. Could you explain why this step matters? This is a probing question. All of these are questions that help the reader and the writer think a little more clearly, a little more in detail, to defend the decisions and choices that they have made. Then you revise based on the feedback. Don't take comments personally. I know it is difficult. I know it is difficult. But don't take comments personally. See them as tools to sharpen your thinking process. The comments are about the work, not about you. And it is okay even if they have pointed out gaps and lapses within your logic. We have spent enough time discussing why people make more mistakes in logic than being right. An intuitive response towards data often leads us in a different direction than what is correct. That's fine. That's human. So don't take these comments personally. People mean well. People have given you this feedback because they want you to excel in your analysis. Therefore, please consider them as ways to improve your thinking pattern, to sharpen your thinking pattern. Before we move forward, here's a reflection for you. Why is it better to ask for feedback early on, even if your draft is not perfect? We have discussed that the first draft may have a lot of lapses. Sometimes it happens, even with me, that the first draft that I have written and the final draft that I have written, they don't resemble each other at all. The first draft is like an alien version of whatever happened in the final draft. They are as different as they could be. However, if I put each draft in a sequence, I can track how the idea is evolving. I can track what I kept, what I removed, what I replaced, and that journey is worth taking because it gives you some semblance about how your writing and thinking have evolved. So you think for yourself, why is it better to ask for feedback early on, even if your first draft is not perfect? We have seen the peer review process in detail. So now I want to introduce you to some best practices for giving and receiving feedback, especially when you have to make the feedback constructive. So let's begin with giving feedback. If you are a peer reviewer, be constructive. Focus on improvement, not on pointing out flaws. Be specific. Point to exact sentences or examples. And even in your feedback, be specific about what you want them to do. Be balanced. Mention strengths as well as areas to revise. Because if you only point out flaws and mistakes, you might run the risk of coming across as a very harsh reviewer. So also point out what they have done well and also point out where they need to improve. You can use questions as well. For example, have you considered doing so and so is more useful than clearly pointing out this is wrong. This is also about tonality. It is also about ensuring that the other person, the writer, the communicator, feels the agency of taking the final decision on the edit. Here's an example feedback. Instead of saying, "This doesn't make sense," you can try, "Can you explain how this conclusion follows from the evidence?" This means at an underlying level that you may not have had the full logic laid out, but it puts the writer at the premier position and gives them an agency, a chance to explain how the conclusion follows from the evidence. One hopes that in that explanation, they will find out that the logic does not come through as smoothly as possible. Now, when you receive feedback, if you are the writer who has given your work out to be reviewed by your peers, and if they have written feedback to you, don't defend too quickly. Listen first. You don't have to defend every choice that you have made. Even if you have an explanation, don't jump right in to start accusing the other person of not reading as clearly as they could. Listen first. Listen to what they have to say. Then clarify if something is unclear. For example, can you say more about what confused you? If somebody has told you that your explanation is confusing, you can also ask clarifying questions so that their feedback becomes more enriched and more functional for you to adapt. Then ask follow-up questions. Would a chart help here? Should I rephrase this example? All of them are conversations that build on initial feedback and help it arrive at something concrete, something actionable. And then reflect before you revise. Is it actually aligning with what you want to say? You also have the right to reject a feedback if it does not align with what you have to say. Here's a quick exercise for you before we move forward. Write a helpful peer comment for this sentence right here. Our results prove that the new feature is the reason behind the sales increase. If you are the one giving peer review, what would you do? What would you say? Mind you, we have already seen these rules for giving feedback, so keep them in mind and then give constructive peer comments to this question on your screen right here. I will come back to you with the concluding remarks for today's lecture. Today's deep dive into peer review and collaborative critique helps us understand that writing is a team sport. I want to invoke one of my favorite authors, Amish Tripathi, at this point. In his debut book, The Immortals of Meluha, in the acknowledgement section, he opens it with this line. They say writing is a lonely pursuit. They lie. So, you write alone, but you improve together. It is, in fact, a team effort. Peer review and collaborative critique make your writing more thoughtful, more responsible, and more effective. They also teach you how to ask better questions, listen more carefully, and revise more wisely. That is why it becomes an integral part of our thinking and writing processes. So that was it from my side. This was the penultimate lecture for this module on critical thinking and logical reasoning. Peer review and collaborative critique are not just parts of critical thinking and logical reasoning. I just wanted to introduce you to them at this stage because I believe we are equipped enough now to understand what critical feedback means. We could have talked about feedback early on, but I thought that we must mature up to this level to understand why they matter and what role they play in our constructive writing journeys. However, I must emphasize that peer review and critical collaborative critique are parts of an overall writing approach that we must take. If you remember, we talked about iterative feedback as a first principle of writing at the beginning of this course. So, this is an overall approach. However, we must learn it from a critical thinking lens. That is why we introduced it at this stage. I hope that we understand why writing is a team sport, why writing happens to be a collaborative effort, and make it a point to practice it at every stage so that your messaging becomes clear for the intended audiences. In the next class, we will wrap up our module on critical thinking and logical reasoning. We will do a recap of all our key concepts and we will learn how to imbibe critical thinking and logical reasoning into technical reports. Until then, all the best, stay curious, keep learning. I will see you in the next class. Thank you for joining me today. Namaskar.